camera's still running. That part was on purpose, and I need you to understand it before anything else, because everything after this is going to make me look like a coward, and I'd rather be judged accurately than generously. My name is Rowan Ostland. I'm 34. For the last 9 years, I have filmed other people's weddings for a living, which means I've spent 9 years standing 4 feet from the happiest moments of strangers' lives and not participating in any of them. That's the job. You hold the frame. You don't enter it. Somebody once told me that a wedding videographer is a ghost with a light meter, and I laughed. And then I went home and didn't sleep. On the last Saturday in September, I was at Thistlewood Barn in Scioto County. 40 minutes from anything with a stoplight, shooting the Pettengill Hollenbeck wedding for $4,000 and a meal I never ate. 106 guests. A hay barn converted in 1998 with money from a soybean settlement. String lights the owner rehung every spring because the winter took them down every year. I had 2 cameras on sticks, one on a gimbal, and a 22-year-old second shooter named Sylvie Rank, who kept whispering, "Is this too much handheld?" into my earpiece, like the answer was going to change. "Sylvie," I said, "lock off on the aisle. Don't move for anything." "Even if it's good?" "Especially if it's good." She thought that was a joke about aesthetics. It wasn't. It was the only piece of professional advice I've ever given that turned out to save a life. The bride was Marisol Pettengill, 29, a physical therapist from DuQuoin with a laugh you could hear through a closed door. The groom was Curtis Hollenbeck, 31, who worked for the county on culvert maintenance, and who had spent the entire morning apologizing to me for how his hands looked in close-up. "Calluses," he said, "diesel under the nails." He kept flexing them open and shut like he could shake the work out of them. "Nobody's watching your hands," I told him. "She is," he said. "She's the only one who counts. I have that on a card. 52 seconds of a man worrying about his hands, 11 hours before I filmed him running." The barn belonged to Odetta Frawley, 68, who had buried a husband and a son on that property and referred to both events as the Bad Aprils. She wore a canvas coat over a good dress and carried a flathead screwdriver in her pocket, the way other women carry lipstick. She met me at the gravel turnaround at 6:40 in the morning and said, "You the picture man?" "I'm the picture man." "Don't film the West Field." "What's in the West Field?" "Nothing anymore," she said, and walked off to unlock things. I filmed the West Field. Of course I did. Long lens, 85mm, because the light was doing that thing at 7 in the morning, where the fog sits in the low ground like spilled milk, and you can't not shoot it. 22 seconds of empty pasture, fence line, tree line behind. I dropped it into the ceremony film later as a transition, and nobody ever noticed what was standing at the far edge of frame right, 300 yards out, motionless in the seam between 2 oaks. I noticed, eventually, around 4 in the afternoon, when noticing stopped being useful and started being an autopsy. Here's what I want you to take from this first part, if you take nothing else. The thing was already there. Before the vows, before the toasts, before Ambrose Quillen, the DJ, played the wrong first dance song and had to restart it while everybody laughed. It stood in my footage for 22 seconds, without moving a single muscle group. And I edited around it. And I poured a coffee, and I went to shoot the bride, putting on her grandmother's earrings. I'm not telling you that to be dramatic. I'm telling you because it's the first honest example of the disease I actually have, which is not the one that killed me. Mine is older. Mine is that I would rather see a thing than deal with it. I have built an entire career on the difference between those two verbs. And on the last Saturday in September, in a converted hay barn in Scioto County, that difference started costing other people their lives instead of just mine. The ceremony began at 4:15. By 4:51, everything I knew about how to stay alive was wrong. The processional was 2/3 finished when Deputy Judson Pyle's cruiser came up the drive with the light bar on and no siren. I remember that detail because it broke a rule of composition. You don't put a flashing blue light in the back of a wedding shot. The color temperature ruins everything. I actually swung my B-cam to crop him out. That was my instinct at the moment the world ended. Reframe. Pyle got out and stood by his door for a long time. Long enough that Odetta walked over to him with her hands loose at her sides, the way you approach a horse you don't know. I had the shotgun mic on, so I have their conversation, mostly, under the string quartet. Judd. Odetta. His voice was wrong, not slurred, flattened, like someone reading a language they'd learned phonetically. Roadblock at Senate Junction. They're turning people back to the county line. Turning them back from what? They didn't say. A pause of maybe 9 seconds. I've been driving since 10 this morning. I don't remember the middle of it. Odetta looked at his uniform. There was a torn place on the forearm, sleeve dark and stiff, and he had buttoned his jacket over it, which meant he knew. You need to sit down, she said. I'd rather stand, said Judson Pyle. And then he didn't move again for 2 full minutes, and nobody thought anything of it, because a man standing still is the most ordinary sight on earth. Marisol came down the aisle at 4:31. I got the shot. Her father had died in February, so she walked alone, and I have never in 9 years seen anyone do it better. Curtis made a sound when he saw her that I had to gate out in post because it was too private to leave in. At 4:51, Emmett Draffen came out of the west field. He was a farmhand from the Boughton place, and I know that now, and I didn't then. What I saw through the eyepiece was a man in a feed store jacket standing at the fence about 90 yards behind the last row of chairs, absolutely motionless, facing us. I kept rolling because he was interesting, and because interesting is my whole job. He stood there for the entirety of the vows. 4 minutes and 40 seconds of a man not moving. Then Priscilla Nunnally, Marisol's mother, stood up to take a phone photo, and her chair scraped, and she waved her arm. He crossed 90 yards in under 11 seconds. I'm not going to describe what happened to Priscilla Nunnally. I filmed it, and I have looked at it more times than a sane person would. And the only thing worth saying is that it was fast, and it was not personal, and that the second sentence is somehow worse than the first. The reception did what any 100 people do. It ran. And that is when the arithmetic of the day revealed itself, though it took us hours to read it. The people who ran were pursued. The people who stumbled and stayed down were passed over. Dove Kirscher, the bartender, went flat behind the ice trough and lay there with his cheek in the runoff. And the thing that was Emmett Draffen stepped over his legs to chase a man in a rented tuxedo who was doing 11 miles an hour toward the parking field. Ambrose Quillen didn't run. Ambrose Quillen dove behind his own speaker stack, knocked it over, and the noise was tremendous, a whole PA going down at full gain. Feedback, the whole hillside ringing with it. Nothing came for the noise. Nothing even turned. That's the first law, and it cost us to learn it. Sound doesn't matter. Not the scream, not the crash, not the wedding band's drummer kicking his kit down the loading ramp. What matters is the tremor of a moving shape. They are not hunting you. They are startled by you over and over, and the startle has teeth. Sylvie stayed locked off on the aisle for 11 seconds after Priscilla went down. I want that in the record. A 22-year-old kid held her frame while a woman died 40 feet away because her boss had told her not to move for anything, and by holding still she made herself furniture, and the thing walked past her tripod close enough to brush the leg. Then she ran, because she was 22, and I had to go get her. That's the last time in the story I did something without thinking about the shot first. 6 minutes into the outbreak. I want to be very clear that my best moment came early and did not repeat. There were 19 of us in the barn when Odetta Frawley dropped the crossbeam into the door brackets, and I counted them on camera because counting was the only useful thing my hands knew how to do. Marisol Pettengill, still in the dress, with grass stain up one side of it. Curtis Hallenbeck, holding her wrist and not her hand gripping, like a tourniquet. Odetta. Harlan Vestry, 71. The officiant, a retired large animal vet who had married them as a favor because he'd vaccinated Marisol's horse when she was 9. Teodoro Sandoval Reyes, the caterer, with a burn on his palm from grabbing a chafing tray he had no reason to grab. Dove Kirscher, soaked to the shoulder in melted ice. Ambrose Quillen. Rosalind Ackerley, the groom's sister, 38, a hospital coder from Belleville who had opinions. A 7-year-old named Tallulah Behar, who everyone called Lulu, and whose mother was not in the barn and was never going to be. 9 others whose names I got over the following hours and whose names I'm going to keep, most of them, because their families deserve to hear it from somebody who isn't a camera. Sylvie and me. 19. The barn was not a fortress. I want to kill that idea now, because I know the shape of the story you're expecting, and this isn't it. Thistlewood Barn was a 120-year-old pole structure with newer siding, 3 doors, and a hayloft with a mow window that had no glass in it. There was no siege. Nothing threw itself at the walls. The 2 we could see through the gap in the loading door stood in the reception field near the overturned cake table and did not move for the next 40 minutes. That was the thing nobody was prepared for. They just stood there. "They're waiting us out," Rosalind said. "They're not waiting," Harlan said. He had his hands in his coat pockets and his eyes on the gap. "There's no waiting in that. Waiting implies a clock." "Then what are they doing?" "Nothing," he said. "Same as a heron does nothing." Curtis was the one who said we should go for the trucks, and the vehicles were 60 yards out in the parking field, and everyone in that barn did the math in their head, and everyone got a different answer, and that was our first argument. It lasted 20 minutes and produced nothing except a permanent seating chart of who trusted whom. Odetta ended it. "Nobody goes out in the light." "They don't seem to see well," Teo said. "They see fine." She said it flat, and then she said the sentence that reorganized the whole night. Judd Pyle stood in my turnaround for 2 minutes without blinking, and I looked right at him, and I thought, that man is tired. That's how good they are. You won't know which ones they are until one of you twitches. Lulu Behar asked where her mom was. Marisol, who had known this child for 4 hours, sat down on a hay bale in a $900 dress and pulled her into her lap and lied to her beautifully. And I filmed it. And Sylvie watched me film it with an expression I've never been able to name. "You're still rolling," she said later in the tack room. "Yes." "Why?" I gave her the answer I'd given at 4 industry panels and 1 bad first date. Because if nobody records it, it only happened to us. Sylvie thought about that longer than it deserved. Then she said, "My phone's got 9%. Everyone else's is dead or in the field. You've got what?" 2 bodies, 4 batteries, 3 cards. About 9 hours of record time if I'm careful. 9 hours of what? And I didn't have an answer for that. And it turned out to be the only question in this entire story that actually mattered. Outside, the lights started to go orange. Odetta went up the loft ladder to look at the west field and came back down with her jaw set in a way I'd learned to read like a weather report. There's more of them in the fog line, she said. Standing. How many? You don't need the number. Odetta. 19, she said, which is a coincidence, and I'd thank you not to say it out loud. Harlan Vestry solved it at 8:15 that night, and he did it out loud, slowly, the way you'd talk a spooked animal into a trailer, because that's what he was actually doing to all of us. 41 years I worked cattle, he said. He was sitting on an overturned mineral tub with his elbows on his knees. You learn a thing about flight zones. An animal doesn't respond to you. It responds to your rate. Walk into a pen at a normal clip, and you'll have 400 head against the back rail. Walk in at half that, and you can put your hand on a heifer's shoulder. These aren't cattle, Rosalind said. No, but whatever's left in them is running on the oldest wiring there is, and that wiring doesn't ask what is that. It asks, is that moving faster than the grass? He looked at Odetta. Judd stood in your turnaround because there was nothing to catch. Emmett stood at that fence for 5 minutes, with 100 people in front of him, and it wasn't until that poor woman waved her arm. Don't, said Marisol. I'm sorry, but that's the shape of it. Dove Kirscher, who had survived by lying in ice water, said, I didn't move. I couldn't. I locked up. It walked over me. Teo said, so we just don't move? Forever? No. Harlan lifted one hand, and he did it so slowly that the whole room watched it like a magic trick. It took him maybe 4 seconds to raise it to his shoulder. You move like this. We spent the next hour practicing in a barn, in the dark, 19 people learning to walk. The count was Sylvie's contribution, and it's the reason any of us lasted past midnight. She said she'd learned it in a film class, that to fake slow motion in camera, you internalize a rhythm. And she gave us 4. 4 counts to lift a foot, 4 counts to place it, 4 counts to shift weight, 4 counts to breathe out. You cross a room in 11 minutes. You cross 60 yards in something over an hour. I filmed the drills because I film everything. And it is the strangest footage I own. Adults in formal wear moving like men on the ocean floor. A flower girl's shoes coming off the plank floor 1 millimeter at a time. Curtis Hallenbeck in a rented vest sweating through it because his whole body wanted to go. He was the worst at it, bar none. He had a builder's tempo in him, and he could not slow it down. Again, Harlan said, I'm doing it. You're doing it at a 2 count and calling it 4, again. I said I'm doing it. Curtis. Marisol's voice from the dark, quiet. Do it again. He did it again, and again. And on the 4th try, he made it 11 feet across the tack room floor without a single acceleration, and the whole room let out a breath, and he laughed a short, wrecked, disbelieving laugh, and said, I'm going to be so good at this by tomorrow. He had 11 hours left. He didn't know, neither did I. But it was already in him, and it was already on my memory card. And if I had scrubbed that footage 6 hours earlier than I did, this would be a different story with a different number of graves in it. At 11 o'clock, we sent the first crossing. Odetta and Teo out the east personnel door, 61 feet to the well house, where there was a hand pump and a chest freezer with 40 pounds of ice and, more importantly, a second exit toward the tree line. It took them 54 minutes. I filmed the whole thing from the mow window on the long lens. And I'm telling you that it was the most excruciating piece of footage I have ever shot. Because for the last 20 feet, there was a thing standing 11 feet to Odetta's right. In the dark, faced half away. And she went past it close enough that her coat sleeve moved in the air, and it did not turn its head. When they got back at 1 in the morning with the water and the ice, Odetta sat down against the wall and shook for 6 minutes and didn't say one word about it, ever. "It works," Teo said. He was crying. He didn't seem to know. "It actually works." That was the high point. I'd like to sit here a while. But at 2:40 in the morning, I put the camera on my knees and started scrubbing back through the day's cards, looking for the drive-in road, looking for an exit route, looking for anything. And I found something else. Frame 1441. That's not poetry. That's a number in a file, and I can still see it in the corner of the display. The fourth card, the shot of Judson Pyle standing by his cruiser at 4:22 in the afternoon. Shot at 60 frames a second because I always overcrank the reception B-roll, so I have the option of slowing it down. He's standing there. The light bar is turning. Odetta is walking away from him toward the barn. And at frame 1441, he skips, not a glitch. I know what a glitch looks like. Dropped frame, torn field, corrupt block. This was clean video with a man in it who, for exactly 7 frames, 116 milliseconds, went absolutely, geometrically still. Not slow, still. Chest, eyelids, the fabric of his sleeve in the breeze. The sleeve keeps moving. The body inside it does not. And then at frame 1449, he resumes mid-breath like the file was spliced. I scrubbed back an hour of his footage. It happened 4 times. 10:58 a.m. in the background of a shot I didn't know I'd taken of the parking field. Twice at noon. Once at 4:22. Getting rarer. Getting shorter. The one at 10:58 lasted almost half a second. I woke Harlan up. I put the screen in his hands and made him watch it 11 times. "Say it out loud," he said finally. "It's in them before it's in them. Hours before. And the body I don't know. Freezes, reboots. Some part of the nervous system drops out and comes back, and you'd never see it with your eyes because it's shorter than a blink. And you'd never feel it because you'd have no memory of the gap." He said he didn't remember the middle of his day. Yeah. Harlan handed the camera back. His hands weren't steady. 9 hours between 10 in the morning and when he went. Judd Pyle was bit sometime before dawn, most likely. So the window's, what, 9 hours, 12? Emmett Draffen worked the Botten place 4 miles that way. Cecil Botten called Odetta's landline yesterday at supper time about a dog. He rubbed his face. Call it 9 to 14 hours from exposure to turn, and the skip is visible for most of it. I understood what I had about 4 seconds before he said it, and I understood exactly how much I did not want it. Rowan. He looked at me the way you look at somebody who is about to be handed a thing they cannot put down. "You can test us." "No. You can film every person in this barn at 60 frames, and you can look at them one at a time, and you can know." "Harlan, I have 3 cards and 4 batteries and 9 hours of—" "I'm aware of your inventory," he said. And it was the only time that old man was ever unkind to me, and he was right to be. "Do you want to be the one holding this, son?" "No. Nobody would. But you're the only one in this building with the equipment, and I am not going to sit here and pretend that isn't true, because it's uncomfortable. Here's what nobody tells you about being handed a diagnostic instrument in the middle of a disaster. It does not feel like power. It feels like being made into a door." I said yes. Obviously I said yes. You know I said yes, or you wouldn't be watching this, but I want the record to show what I was actually thinking in the 11 seconds before I said it. Because it wasn't about saving anybody. It was this. If I do this, I get to keep filming. Not as a coward with a hobby, as an instrument, as the necessary man. I had spent 9 years apologizing to myself for standing outside of things with a lens in my hands. And at 2:40 in the morning, in a hay barn, full of the almost dead, the world finally handed me a reason. I was so grateful I could have wept. That's the confession. Not what I did later. Later, I only did what a man with that gratitude in him was always going to do. This is the part I'd take back. We started at 3:10 in the morning. Sylvie held the light. Harlan explained it to each person as they sat down on the mineral tub, one at a time, 3 minutes of footage each. And I went out to the loft afterward with the display shaded under my jacket, and I read them like a man reading a telegram from a war. 18 people. It took until 5:40. 17 were clean. I sat in the hayloft with the mow window going gray, and I watched Curtis Hallenbeck skip 4 times in 180 seconds of footage. The longest was at 0:47. 9 frames. He's answering a question Harlan had them all say their full name and what they'd had for breakfast. To keep them talking, to keep the face live, and Curtis is saying 2 eggs and a sausage biscuit from the marathon station on. And he stops. Mouth open on the on, eyes not closing. A piece of hay dust drifting past his cheek at normal speed, the only moving object in the frame. Then he says, "On Route 9, and laughs at himself for the detail. I watched it until the sun came up. I want to walk you through what I considered, because I've had a long time to be honest about it, and the honesty is the only thing left that's worth anything. Option 1. Tell nobody. Let it happen. There were 18 people in that barn, and one of them was going to open up like a trap door sometime in the next 6 hours. And if he did it in the dark, in a room full of sleepers, we would lose most of everyone. So no, not really an option, just the shape of the coward's daydream. And I had it, and it lasted about 90 seconds. Option 2, tell Harlan and Odetta, and let the 3 of us handle it. Manage him outside somehow, contain it. This is the one I liked. This one had a committee in it, and a committee is a wonderful thing to hide inside. Option 3, tell Curtis. Here's the thing about the third one that I couldn't get around, and that I still can't. He had between 4 and 8 hours. That is not nothing. That is longer than a workday. A man given 8 hours can say goodbye to his wife of one day. A man not given them can't. I came down the ladder at 6:15, and I asked Curtis to step out to the tack room. And Marisol saw my face and came too. And I have never in my life been more grateful for someone refusing to leave a room. I told him with the camera off, I want that in here. I turned it off and set it on the workbench, and I told a man that I had watched his body die 4 times in 3 minutes, and that the rest of him would be along shortly. He said, "Show me." I showed him. He watched it twice. He asked me to slow it down, and I stepped it frame by frame, and he watched himself stop existing at 11 frames per second of my thumb on a jog wheel. And then he said the single most extraordinary thing anybody said to me that whole night. "Does it hurt?" "I don't. When it happens." He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Marisol, who had her hand over her mouth and her eyes absolutely dry. Judd talked normal. He said he didn't remember the middle of the day. That doesn't sound like it hurts. That sounds like going under for a tooth. "I don't know," I said. "Okay." He nodded. He nodded about 6 times. "Okay. Then I've got some hours." Marisol said his name once, and then she folded up, and he caught her. And I picked the camera up off the workbench. And I want you to know that my hand went to it, the way another man's hand goes to his own throat. I did not turn it on, not then. I stood there holding it off camera, and watching them for 4 minutes. And it was the hardest physical labor of my entire life. Then Curtis said over her shoulder, in a completely level voice, "Rowan, turn it on." "No. I've got nobody left except her and Roz. My mother's in a facility in Mount Vernon, and she won't know what happened to me." He was crying now, finally, and still level, which is a thing I did not know a face could do. "You film weddings, so film the rest of mine." I turned it on. I have 81 minutes of Curtis Hallenbeck's last morning. I have him teaching Lulu Behar the 4 count until she could cross the tack room like a small ghost. I have him and Roz arguing about a car their father sold in 2004. I have him telling Odetta that her barn was the nicest building he'd ever been married in. And Odetta saying it was the only building he'd ever been married in. And both of them laughing like people at a party. And I have the last 11 minutes, which are just him and Marisol at the far end of the tack room with the mic too far away to catch it. And I have never once played the audio. And I never will. And I want whoever finds this to know that I could have gone in closer and I chose not to. And it is the only professional decision of my life I'm proud of. At 9:40 in the morning, he stood up and said, "All right. Let's talk about the trucks." By 10 in the morning, the barn had split into 2 countries, and I was the border. It happened the way these things always happen, not through argument, but through arithmetic. 17 clean, 1 not. Everybody could do that math, and everybody had already run the second calculation, which was, he was clean yesterday, which meant clean was a photograph, not a passport. Which meant we'd have to test again, and again. And who decides when? And who reads the screen? Rosalind Ackerley got there first, and she got there loudest, which is what people do when they're watching their brother die and need a place to put it. "Every 4 hours," she said. "Everyone, no exceptions." "That's 40 minutes of record time each round," I said. 18 people. I'll be out of card in a day and out of battery in 2. Then film shorter. The skip is getting shorter as it progresses. Curtis's first one was probably half a second. By yesterday afternoon, Judd's were down to a 1/10. If I shoot 90-second clips, I'll start missing people. And a miss is worse than nothing. Because a miss is a clean bill of health on somebody who... "Then you'd better be careful," said Rosalind. "With the batteries." Priscilla Nunnally was dead in the reception field. So the opposition came from an unexpected direction. Dov Kirscher, the bartender, 26, who had lain in ice water for 9 minutes while the world ended above him and had come out of it with a very specific and very reasonable form of insanity. "I'm not sitting for it," he said. "Dov, I've watched you 2 nights now." He wasn't hostile. That was the disturbing part. He was gentle about it, almost apologetic, sitting on a hay bale with his knees pulled up. You look at a screen, and then you look at a person, and you know something about them they don't know. And you decide when they find out. That's not a test, that's a ledger. And I don't want my name in it. It's already in it. You tested clean. Then take me out. Odetta Frawley said, from the corner, "You want the option of not knowing?" "Yes." He looked relieved that somebody had said it right. "Yes, ma'am, I do." And here is the thing I did not expect. 5 other people agreed with him. Not 4, 5. Almost a third of that barn looked at a machine that could tell them whether they were going to die today, and chose, deliberately, with full information, to walk away from it. I thought they were cowards. I said so, in a way, to Harlan up in the loft. And Harlan looked at me for a long time with his hands around a cup of well water. "You've had that camera in front of your face since you were how old?" 16. And it's never once been pointed at you. That's not Rowan. Not unkind this time. Tired. There's a version of this where you're the only person in this barn who thinks knowing is free. I went and tested the 6 holdouts anyway. I did it without telling them. I filmed the room. Wide shot, 60 frames, from the loft. 40 minutes of everybody sleeping and eating and moving around. And then I sat up there in the dark and scrubbed through 18 people's bodies looking for the moment they stopped. All clean. Every one. I felt magnificent about it for about 90 seconds, and then I felt something else. And the something else has been with me ever since. I'd like to tell you I deleted the wide shot. I kept it. Of course I kept it. It's on the card. If you're watching all of this in order, you've already seen it, and you probably didn't know what you were looking at. 40 minutes of nothing, a barn full of people who did not consent, being read. At noon, Curtis skipped in front of everyone. Not on camera. In the actual room, in actual life, standing at the loading door with a mug in his hand. 4 seconds this time, long enough for a human eye. Marisol saw it. Lulu saw it and asked why he was doing a statue. He came back mid-sentence, saw all our faces, and said, "Yeah, okay, it's speeding up." He set the mug down very carefully, like it belonged to somebody else. "Let's do it now," he said, "while I've still got the count in me." The plan was Curtis's, and everybody hated it, and nobody had a better one, which is the definition of a plan in a situation like that. 60 yards of parking field. 11 vehicles, of which 4 had keys accounted for. Odetta's flatbed, Teo's catering van, a Corolla belonging to a bridesmaid who was not with us anymore, and the deputy's cruiser, which sat in the turnaround with its light bar still turning on a dying battery. Between us and them, at the last count Odetta took from the Mao window, 26 standing figures spread across the reception field and the drive, motionless in the noon light like a sculpture installation. 17 people at 4 count would take a little over an hour to cross that. 17 people in a loose line, over an hour, in daylight. With a 7-year-old and a woman in a formal dress and Ambrose Quillen who had a knee replacement in 2019. The odds of 17 consecutive human beings not flinching for 61 minutes are 0. Everybody in that barn knew it, and nobody would say it, because saying it meant saying the next part. Curtis said the next part. "You need them looking somewhere else." "No," said Marisol. "Baby, no. They only react to rate," he said. "So one person moves at rate and everybody else moves like grass. That's not a sacrifice. That's physics. I'm the only one here who doesn't have to survive the physics." I filmed the argument. 19 minutes of it. I'm not going to reproduce it here because it belonged to them. And I've already taken enough. But I'll tell you the shape. Marisol did not fight him on whether he was going to die. She fought him on the when. She wanted his last 4 hours. She had them coming to her, and she wanted them. And she said so, out loud, in front of everyone, without 1 ounce of shame. And I have never respected anybody more in my life. And Curtis said, "If I use them, you don't get any at all, because I'll be here when it happens." That ended it. Not fairly, but it ended it. Then Rosalind Ackerley, who had been quiet for 11 minutes, said the thing that changed the ending of this story. "He needs a route," she said. "He can't just run in a circle. He needs to pull them somewhere, and he needs to not be pulling them across our line." She was right, and it was a real problem. And the solution turned out to be in my footage. 22 seconds of the West Field at 7 in the morning, 85 millimeter, fog in the low ground. I'd shot it for the pretty. On the frame by frame, there's a farm track running north out of the pasture toward the tree line, and a cattle gate. And beyond the gate, the ground drops into a wet draw that Odetta confirmed ran a half-mile to the boughten place. If he goes out the west personnel door and up that track, Odetta said, he takes the whole field with him. Everything standing between here and the cars is going to turn and follow a man running north, and we go south, slow, and we've got maybe 40 minutes of clean field. And him, said Teo. Nobody answered. Curtis looked at the little display in my hands, at the pretty morning shot with the track running out of it, and he said something I've thought about every day since. You had it the whole time. I didn't know what it was. No, I mean, he was trying to be kind about it, and that made it worse. You had a picture of the way out at 7 in the morning, and a picture of Judd dying at 4 in the afternoon, and a picture of me at 3:10. He shook his head slowly, 4 count, a joke only he found funny. Man, you've got everything. You just don't look at it till after. That's the sentence. If you take one line out of 11 hours of footage, take that one. A man with 2 hours to live diagnosing me correctly. In a hay barn, without any particular malice. We set it for 2 o'clock. Odetta went up and counted the field twice more. Harlan drilled the 7-year-old on the 4 count until she could do it in her sleep. And then he drilled Ambrose Quillen, who could not, and who was told kindly, brutally, by a 71-year-old veterinarian that if he could not hold a rate, he should stay in the barn and take his chances with the hayloft, and who said he understood, and who came anyway. And at 1:40, while the others were lining up at the south door, I went and found Curtis in the tack room and asked him the only question I had left. Where do you want the camera? He said, on me. He said, all the way. Don't cut. He said, and Rowan, you stay with them. You film it from the window, and then you go with my wife. If I look back and see you standing in that field with a tripod, I will personally come back and kill you. And I mean that in the way I'm about to be able to mean it. He laughed. I did not. At 2 p.m., Curtis Hallenbeck went out the west personnel door of Thistlewood Barn at a dead sprint in a rented vest with his shirt sleeves rolled, and I filmed it from the mow window on the 85, and I did not cut. And here is what happened. For the first 4 seconds, nothing. He was 11 strides out before the field understood. Then the whole reception ground turned at once. 26 figures, near the cake table, along the fence, one standing in the bed of Odetta's flatbed, one that had been in the same position by the well house for 14 hours. Every single one of them rotated toward him in the same half-second, like iron filings when the magnet comes down. And the sound they made was not a scream. It was a kind of collective intake, 19 or 20 sets of lungs pulling at the same time. And then the field emptied northward. I have it, 2 minutes and 51 seconds. A man in a white shirt running up a farm track through knee-high fescue with 26 things behind him, closing and the fog burning off the low ground, and the camera perfectly steady because a monopod does not have feelings. He made the cattle gate. I want that known. He was faster than they were for 400 yards. And he went over that gate like a man 20 years younger. And he got into the draw and out of my frame. And the last thing in the shot is grass moving in a line, going away. I don't know how far he got. Nobody does. The rest of us went out the south door at 2:03 and crossed 60 yards of parking field in 52 minutes. I filmed that too. I filmed it with the camera at my hip on a wrist strap, one-handed, because I would not put it down. And that is going to matter in a minute. Lulu Behar was perfect. 52 minutes, 7 years old, 4 count the entire way, her hand in Marisol's, both of them moving like something underwater. Harlan brought Ambrose Quillen across at the back with a grip on his belt. Dove Kirscher went second to last and did not shake once. Odetta led. Teo carried the water. 4 of the 26 had not gone north. We'd known that going in, Odetta had counted them from the window, and we went around them, wide. And it took an extra 11 minutes, and nobody's rate broke. At the flatbed, Odetta got the door open in 2.5 minutes of continuous 4 count. And 11 of us got in the bed, and 6 in the cab of the van, and Teo turned the key. Nothing. Not a click. Not a crank. Somebody had left the interior light on for 22 hours, or the battery was simply the battery it had always been. And Teodoro Sandoval Reyes sat in the driver's seat of his own catering van and put both hands on the wheel and did not move for a very long time, and it was the only correct thing to do. We got 17 people onto and into one flatbed truck. It took another 19 minutes. Odetta started it, and the noise was enormous, and absolutely nothing in that field so much as turned its head. And we went down the gravel drive at 4 miles an hour because Odetta Frawley said a truck at 4 miles an hour is a slow-moving object, and a truck at 40 is prey. And I believed her. And she was right. Marisol Pettengill sat with her back against the cab and watched the west field until we turned onto the county road, and it went out of sight. She didn't cry. She said one thing to me without looking over. "Did you get all of it?" "Yes." "Good," she said. And then about a mile later, "I hate you a little." "Yeah." "That's not..." She pressed the heels of her hands into her eyes. "That's not fair, and I don't mean it, and I'm going to want that footage every day for the rest of my life. But you had a choice about where to stand, and you stood where you always stand." There was no answer to that. I've had a long time to look for one. We made 11 miles. The Senate Junction roadblock was real. Judson Pyle hadn't been lying, or hadn't been lying yet. It was also abandoned 2 sawhorses, a National Guard Humvee with the doors open, and a folding table with a clipboard on it that had 41 names and a column headed "Exposure Time," which told me that somewhere, somebody official had figured out the same clock we had and had been made to stop counting. Odetta turned us around and took the section roads to a place she called the Grieve property, a hog operation that had gone under in 2016, with a 2-story farmhouse, a shop building. And this is the part that mattered: a 40,000-watt standby generator on a concrete pad that Silas Grieve had bought on credit the year before he lost everything, power, which meant I could charge. I want to be honest about the sequence of my thoughts when I saw that generator in order as they happened. Power. Then, I can keep testing. Then, I can keep filming. Then, 7th or 8th in line, somewhere behind lights and a working chest freezer. These people can live. 17 of us moved into that farmhouse on Sunday evening, and by Monday morning, I had established a routine, and by Monday afternoon, I had a chair. That's not a metaphor. I had a chair in the back bedroom, facing a window with north light, and people came and sat in it, and I filmed them for 3 minutes. And then they went and waited downstairs while I read them. Harlan set the schedule. Odetta ran the house. Rosalind ran the inventory. And I ran the chair. I was very good at it. That's the part I've never been able to explain to anyone without it sounding like a boast. I got fast. By Tuesday, I could read a 3-minute clip in about 4 minutes at speed, watching the shoulder line and the fabric versus body differential rather than the face, because clothing keeps moving when the body stops, and the eye catches contradiction faster than it catches stillness. I built a whole methodology in 40 hours. I was better at it than I had ever been at anything, including the thing I'd trained 9 years for. And every single one of them came back clean, day after day. And every single one of them looked at me with a specific expression when I came down the stairs. And I began to live on that expression the way other people live on food. Sylvie was the one who saw it. "You're enjoying this." We were on the porch, Tuesday, late. Generator humming behind the shop. That's a hell of a thing to say. "I've worked for you 14 months. She had her arms crossed, and she was 22, and she was not backing off an inch. "I've watched you at 11 weddings. You know what you look like at a wedding? Like a guy doing a job he's good at and doesn't like. You know what you look like coming down those stairs?" I didn't say anything. "Like the father of the bride," she said. There was a long silence on that porch. Down in the yard, one of the standing ones had drifted into the fence line. They did that, we'd learned, drifting slowly over hours, and as long as you moved at rate, they'd let you walk right past, and it stood there in the dark, being no threat to anyone. "Somebody has to read them," I said. "Sure, but you're the only one who's never sat in the chair." I told her I tested myself. That was a lie, and it took me about 1.5 seconds to produce it. And I've thought a lot about how easy that was. "Then show me," she said. "Sylvie, show me a clip of you in the chair, Rowan. Any clip, from any day." And I said, "I'll do it tomorrow." And she looked at me for about 4 seconds, and then she went inside, and neither of us mentioned it again. And that was Tuesday. On Wednesday morning, I read Sylvie Rank's 3-minute clip, and at 1:12 she skipped for 6 frames. I watched it 40 times. 6 frames. 100 milliseconds. She's saying scrambled eggs, which is the only thing left. And her jaw stops on the L, and her hair, she'd tied it back with a rubber band off the newspaper on the kitchen table. Her hair keeps swinging for those 6 frames while her skull does not. It was real. I knew it was real. I had read 140 clips by then, and I knew the difference between a skip and a compression artifact and a rolling shutter tear the way a radiologist knows a shadow, and this was a skip, and it was 6 frames, which by the curve we'd mapped put her at somewhere between 5 and 9 hours out. And I sat in that back bedroom, and I did the single worst thing I have ever done. I told everybody she was clean. Let me lay out the reasoning, because there was reasoning. And the existence of reasoning is exactly the problem. 1. The light had changed. A cloud had come over during her clip, and the camera had adjusted exposure, and I told myself the frame integration might have a This is a real phenomenon in a real sensor, and I have never once seen it produce a 6-frame freeze with independent motion in the same frame. And I knew that. And I said it to myself anyway. 2. She was 22. She had no bite. Nobody in that house had a bite. We'd checked everyone on Sunday, all of us, in pairs, in the shop building, with a flashlight. Whatever had gotten into her had gotten in some other way. And if there was some other way, then the entire model was wrong. And if the model was wrong, then the chair was worthless. And if the chair was worthless, then I was just a man with a camera again. 3. And this is the true one. The other 2 are furniture. She was mine. I hired her. She'd sat in a Panera in Marion 2 years ago and told me she wanted to shoot documentaries, and I told her weddings would teach her more about people than any documentary ever would. And she'd believed me. And she was standing in the doorway of a hog farmer's abandoned kitchen with a rubber band in her hair because of a sentence I said to her over a bread bowl. I came down the stairs. Odetta looked up. Harlan looked up. 16 faces. All clean, I said. Then I went out to the shop building and threw up. I had a plan, which is the way men like me survive the moment of a decision like that. I was going to keep her with me. I'd take the night watch in the shop, and I'd bring her out there with me, and I'd sit with her for 9 hours. And if it happened, I would. I never finished that sentence. Not once, not in 11 hours of turning it over. I would. That was as far as it went. I would. At 2 in the afternoon, Rosalind Ackerley came to find me and said Sylvie wanted the card reader. What for? She wants to look at her own clip. Rosalind was watching my face, and she was a hospital coder, and she read charts for a living. Rowan, she wants to look at her own clip. I gave it to her. That's the whole action. 4 words. I could have said no. I could have said the batteries. I could have said anything. And instead I handed a 22-year-old a card reader and a laptop with 11% on it. And I stood there in a kitchen while she found frame 112 in about 90 seconds, because she was very good, and I had trained her myself. She watched it 4 times. Then she closed the laptop and looked up at me and said, in an absolutely ordinary voice, the way you'd tell someone their car was blocking you in, "You said all clean." The room went so quiet I could hear the generator. I have replayed this moment more than any other, and I still do not know what I would say. I know what I said, which was nothing, for 11 full seconds, in a kitchen with 14 people in it. Sylvie stood up. She said, "It's okay." She said it to me. She said, "You were going to sit with me tonight, weren't you?" And I said yes. And she nodded like that squared some account. And then she turned to the room and said, "I need somebody to lock me in the milk house, and I need it to not be him." Odetta Frawley said, "I'll do it." And Dove Kirscher from the corner said the thing that finished me. How many others? That's the question that took the house apart. Not is Rowan a liar? How many others? Because once they knew I'd held one back, every clean reading I'd ever given became a rumor. Rosalind wanted the cards. All of them. Every clip since Saturday, reread by committee, 4 people watching each one. And I said, fine, do it. And then I said the second thing, the true thing, and the true thing was worse. You can't read them, I said. Not you, not 4 of you, not 40. It took me 2 days to learn to see it, and I have 9 years of frame by frame in my hands. You'll look at 140 clips, and you'll find skips that aren't there, and miss the ones that are, and then you'll act on it. So we're supposed to trust you? No, I said. That's my point. There's nobody to trust. There's a tool and one person who can operate it, and that person is a liar. That's the actual situation. I'm not asking you to like it. Harlan Vestry said from the doorway, "Then teach somebody." So I taught Rosalind Ackerley. 11 hours, Wednesday night into Thursday, at the kitchen table, on a dying laptop, going through Judd Pyle's cruiser footage and Curtis's 310 clip, and 40 of the clean ones, so she'd learn what normal looked like, which is the hard part, which is always the hard part. She was good. Not fast, but careful, and careful is better. And around 4 in the morning, going through the Saturday cards for training material, she found the wide shot. 40 minutes of a barn full of people who had refused testing, filmed from the hayloft without their knowledge. She didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, "Dolph's in this." "Yes." He specifically said no. "Yes." She kept scrubbing. I watched a woman decide something about me in real time, and there was no part of it I could argue with. "You know what the strange thing is?" she said finally. You could have just not shown me this card. You had 11 hours to pull it. I know. Why didn't you? And I gave her the honest answer, which I'd only just then found. Because I've spent 4 days telling people what's in the footage, and I can't be the only one who decides what the footage is. If I edit this, there's nothing left. It's just me talking. Rosalind Ackerley looked at me for a long moment, and then went and woke Dove Kirscher and showed him at 4:30 in the morning. And I sat in that kitchen and listened to a young man find out he'd been read against his will while he slept. And I did not go in there, and that was correct. And it still felt like the 4th or 5th worst thing I'd ever done. Sylvie turned at 11 minutes past 6 on Thursday morning in the milk house with Odetta sitting outside the door on an upturned bucket. And Odetta was the one who came and told me. And Odetta was the one who handled what came after. And Odetta never once told me what that involved, and I never once asked. 6 people left that afternoon. Dove and Ambrose Quillen and 4 others. They took the Corolla we'd towed and 1/3 of the water, and they did it in daylight at 4 miles an hour. And nobody stopped them because there was no longer anyone in that house with the authority to stop anybody. They didn't leave angry. That's what I remember. Dove shook my hand on the porch and said, "I hope you get where you're going," and meant it, and got in the car. 11 of us stayed. And on Thursday evening, alone in the back bedroom with the north light going, I finally sat in the chair. I set the camera on the dresser, 60 frames, and I said my full name and what I'd had for breakfast, which was nothing. And I talked for 3 minutes about a culvert in 2017, and a man named Neil Prather that I watched drown from 11 feet away with a broadcast camera on my shoulder, which is a story I'd never told anyone in that house and have not told you yet. Then I read it. At 2:04, I skip. 9 frames. 9 frames put me between 6 and 11 hours out, and I sat in that chair in the dark for 40 minutes doing the only arithmetic that has ever really mattered to me. Here's how it happened, for the record, because Harlan will want to know, and I won't be able to tell him. Tuesday night, in the shop building, moving a hog panel to block the roll-up door, I put my hand down on a bolt head and opened my palm about 1.5 inches. I washed it. I did not think about it, because nothing had touched me, because there had been no event. I want anyone reading this who works on the medical side to understand that. It does not require a bite. It requires broken skin and a surface. And that shop had been standing open to that county for 4 days. Which means Sylvie, who had cut her thumb Monday on a can lid in that same building, was not an anomaly in my model. She was a confirmation of it. I'd had the data on Wednesday morning to work that out and save 6 people the drive to Senate Junction, and I hadn't, because I'd been too busy building a reason to be right. I went downstairs at 8 and told them. All of them at once, in the kitchen, in about 90 seconds, with the clip on the laptop already queued to 2:04, so nobody had to take my word for one more thing in their lives. Marisol Pettengill said, "Show me the frames." I showed her. She looked at it the way she'd looked at her husband's once, without flinching. Then she said, "Okay. What are you doing with your hours?" Not "I'm sorry," not "Are you sure?" A woman 4 days widowed asking a dying man what his plan was, because she was the only person in that house who had already been through this exact door and knew what was on the other side of it. We had 11 people, 1 flatbed truck with a quarter tank and a route. The route was Rosalind's, and it came out of the cards, which by then had become the most valuable object any of us owned. Somewhere in the Saturday reception footage in the background of the parking field, over a bridesmaid's shoulder, at 11:04 in the morning, There is a Chiota County school bus going west on the Ridge Road with its stop arm folded and its lights off. That bus should not have existed. Nobody in that county runs a bus on a Saturday. Rosalind found it Thursday afternoon, and Odetta looked at it and said, "That's the Kelso Ridge route. That's the high school barn." Meaning what? Meaning somebody was moving people east on Saturday morning at 11, and the only thing east on that road with a generator and a well is the AG building at Kelso Ridge. 29 miles. On section roads at 15 miles an hour, with a stop to siphon, call it 4 hours. Which was inside my window. Barely. "So I drive," I said. Harlan Vestry said, "You don't. Harlan, you put a man with 6 hours behind the wheel of the only vehicle carrying 11 people, and somewhere on Kelso Ridge, he goes still for 4 seconds at 15 miles an hour. He didn't raise his voice. He never once raised his voice. That whole week. Odetta drives. You sit in the bed. And Rowan, you sit in the bed facing backward with the tailgate between you and everybody. And you don't argue with me about it, because I've spent 41 years putting animals in the right pen, and I have never once enjoyed it." I said, "Okay." Then I went and got the camera, and Marisol saw me do it, and something in her face changed, and she said, "Rowan, not this time." "It's not for that." "Then what's it for?" And I said the thing I'd been circling for 4 days, and it came out badly, the way true things do. Somebody has to teach the next people how the skip works. Rosalind can read it, but she can't teach it, not yet, not from scratch. And if this house falls, the method dies with us, and every group in this county starts from 0 on Saturday morning. I held it up. 2 pounds of plastic and glass with a cracked hot shoe. This isn't a record of us anymore. This is the instructions. Marisol Pettingill looked at me for a long moment. "Then say it out loud," she said. "All of it. Don't make them find it in the pictures. That's why the narration exists. That's why you've been listening to my voice this whole time, instead of just watching a wedding fall apart. A woman whose husband I filmed running told me to stop hiding inside my own footage, and I did what she said. And I've been talking into this microphone in 4-hour increments ever since. We loaded the truck at 9. We got 22 of the 29 miles. Kelso Ridge Road crosses the Little Senate on a 1-lane bridge with a concrete deck and steel guards. And there was a car on it, a green Buick, nose into the rail, both doors open, and there were 14 standing in and around it, in the dark, in the rain that had started around 11. Odetta stopped the flatbed 100 yards out and cut the engine, and we sat. Can we push through? At speed? Maybe. She had both hands on the wheel. And then we've got 14 behind us going the same direction we are, for as long as we're the fastest thing on that road. And this truck does not do 50 on gravel with 11 people in the bed. So we move the car. So we move the car, Odetta agreed. 4 count, 2 people. Neutral, doors open, push. 45 minutes, maybe an hour. With 14 of them at arm's length the whole time. Nobody said anything for a while. Rain on a steel truck bed is very loud and completely irrelevant, which by then we all understood. I unlatched the tailgate. Here's what I want to be exact about, because this is the part where a person like me is tempted to make himself look better than the tape supports. I did not volunteer out of heroism. I volunteered out of inventory. I had somewhere between 1 and 4 hours left. I could not be permitted to drive. I could not be permitted to sit inside a walled building with 10 uninfected people. And there is no version of the next morning in which I am anything other than a problem that Harlan Vestry has to solve with his hands. Given that, walking onto a bridge was not a sacrifice. It was the only remaining use for me. I say that not to run myself down. I say it because I have watched a lot of footage of people doing brave things, and I have learned that bravery is almost always somebody arriving at the end of their options and choosing the last one well. Teo Sandoval Reyes came with me. I tried to talk him out of it for about 90 seconds, and he said, "I sat in a van and couldn't turn a key." And that was the entire argument. And he won it. We were on that bridge for 51 minutes. The camera was on the tripod in the truck bed, locked off, framing the whole span on a wide lens, rolling because Rosalind asked for it. For the instructions, she said, and used my own line on me, and I deserved it. So there's footage of it. 2 men pushing a Buick 11 feet at a time, 4 counts to set the hands, 4 counts to load the weight, 4 counts to release, with 14 standing shapes distributed around them like posts in a fence. There's a moment at about minute 34 where Teo's foot slips on the wet deck, and he goes down on one knee, and the nearest one turns its head. And he holds on one knee, in the rain, on a concrete bridge, for what the time code says is 4 minutes and 11 seconds. And it turns away. I have thought about Teodoro Sandoval Reyes on that knee more than almost anything else in my life. We got the Buick to the far abutment at 12:44 a.m. The flatbed came across at 12:51 at 4 miles an hour with 10 people in it, and Odetta Frawley driving with her jaws set. And it went past us and stopped 40 yards up the road, and Teo went to it, 4 count, the whole way, and got in. And I did not. I'd like to say there was a speech. There wasn't. I skipped at 12:47 on the bridge. I felt it. Or rather, I felt the absence of about a second and a half. The way you feel a stare that isn't there, and Teo saw it. And we both understood the arithmetic had run out about 90 minutes ahead of schedule. So I picked up the tripod out of the truck bed, and I carried it back to the middle of the bridge, and I set it on the concrete facing east, toward Kelso Ridge, toward where they were going. I checked the card. 11 gigs. I checked the battery. 62%. I hit record. Marisol Pettengill stood up in the bed of that truck and put her hand flat against the rain, palm out, and held it there, and did not say a word, because words are for people who can afford to move fast. Then Odetta drove them away at 4 miles an hour, and I stood on a bridge in Chiota County and watched a set of taillights go slow into the dark, and behind me, 14 shapes stood in the rain and did not care about any of it. I've got a little time, so I'm going to use it the way Marisol told me to, out loud, all of it. If you're hearing this, the card survived. That's more than I managed, so we're already ahead. Here's what it's for. 60 frames a second or better. 3 minutes minimum, longer in bad light. Watch the shoulder line, not the face. Clothing keeps moving when the body stops, and your eye catches the contradiction faster than it catches the stillness. 6 to 9 frames means 5 to 9 hours. Under 4 frames means you're close. It gets shorter as it gets nearer, so a clean read is a photograph, not a promise. Broken skin is enough. There doesn't have to be an event. And they don't hunt you. They're startled by you. 4 counts to lift, 4 to place, 4 to shift, 4 to breathe. A 7-year-old learned it in one afternoon. You can too. That's the instructions. Everything else is just me. I spent 9 years believing that standing outside a thing and getting it right was a form of service. I filmed a man drown in 2017 and told myself the tape mattered. I filmed a woman's husband run into a field and told myself he'd asked me to. Some of that was even true. But a lens is not a place to stand. It's a place to hide that happens to face the right direction. And I hid there so long, I forgot there was a difference between witnessing and helping. And by the time I found out, The only help I had left to give was to become a piece of equipment. So, my name is Rowan Ostland. 11 people went east on Kelso Ridge Road at 12:51 in the morning. Odetta Frawley was driving. If they made it, they know how to read this, and they'll teach you. I'm going to leave this running. Not because anything worth seeing happens next, it doesn't. And I'd ask you to skip it. I'm leaving it running, because for once in my life, the camera is going to stay, and I'm the one who has to go. Pointed at somebody who's still here,